so I just got back from seeing 28 Years Later, and I thought it was pretty great. In honor of the film coming out, I decided to rewatch the first two movies to see how well they hold up, and I still pretty much have the same opinions on them as I did the last time I watched them. 28 Days Later is probably my favorite zombie movie of all time, aside from Shaun of the Dead, and is one of the few horror films that can genuinely scare me. I will never forget the first time I watched this movie and being constantly freaked the fuck out. When Jim enters the church and those two zombies stare at him, I was terrified. They don't attack him, they don't growl, they just stare. That scene alone was more effective than most modern horror movies I've seen, and no jump scares were even involved. If there's one thing I can compliment the first film on, it's tone. Right from the start, you are thrusted into Jim's world, and you, along with Jim, try to slowly piece together what's going on, as all of London is essentially a ghost town. The way the infected are shot also helps with the movie's scare factor. It's neat seeing horror movies get creative with their scares, and 28 Days Later is no different. Its use of POV shots are terrifying, yet reminds me of the startup screen for the first Resident Evil game, where Chris is getting snuck up on from a zombie's POV, which would make sense, seeing that 28 Days Later was heavily inspired by Resident Evil. And of course, who could forget the grainy 480p quality of the film, which only accentuates the horror as you don't feel as if you're watching a movie, you get the sense that this is a documentary and that you are living in this world with them. The camera in this film may as well be its own character, that's how integral it is. Then we have 28 Weeks Later, which is...
What if it comes back?
It won't come back.
What if it does?
If it comes back, we kill it. I will miss.
Well, the first 10 minutes are cool, I guess. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on the first two movies though, you can check out Sky Spixru's channel, where I guested on her podcast, co-hosted by Evan Monroe, as we cover the first two movies in extensive detail. But anyway, leading into 28 Years Later, I was curious as to how they would tackle the style for this movie, as each movie has its own distinct style, and if you've heard anything about 28 Years Later, chances are you've probably heard that this movie was shot using an iPhone. In fact, it's been talked about so much, to the point where many are acting like that they are just shooting on an iPhone period, and if you want to get really granular with it, then sure, the movie was shot using an iPhone, but they've modified it so much to the point where it may as well have not been shot on one. When I first saw the news about it, I thought that they were going to try and go back to their roots with the first movie's visual style, due to the fact that the entire movie was shot on an iPhone. But when you see the movie, you wouldn't be able to tell that the movie was shot on an iPhone unless you had that knowledge going in. Despite that, this movie still manages to look incredible, and is on par with the first movie when it comes to visuals. The way they use the iPhone to convey the viewpoint of the characters in the world they live in is truly immaculate, and proves that shooting this movie with the iPhone was necessary for the story it was trying to tell. You may not see it at first, because on your first viewing, you are trying to take in all the information the movie presents to you, but on a second viewing, you can definitely appreciate a lot of the technical aspects that were made, especially with its choice of being mostly handheld. While the movie does occasionally dip into still shots, it never lingers on them for long before going back to handheld. Usually I'm not the biggest fan of handheld shaky cam. I think if you want me to stay immersed in a film, you have to do a lot of work for me to not get taken out of it when there's shaky cam involved. Not because I hate the style or anything, but because so many filmmakers don't know how to use it effectively. But in 28 Years Later, it works extremely well, along with the quick cuts to exacerbate the tension or desperation of a situation. Although I'm not entirely surprised by how well the handheld worked in this movie, due to the fact that 28 Days Later made shaky cam its entire identity in that movie. Another thing I particularly liked about the visuals was the way each zombie kill was directed. The way they had shot it was that they designed this rig with a ton of iPhones around the zombie, so that when a zombie was killed, they would shift around the zombie to emphasize said kill, in a sort of Matrix style. It's such a unique way to show a kill, and every time I saw it in action throughout the movie, the more I fell in love with it. Anything to do with the direction in this movie, I absolutely adored, and the way they quickly flash between time points, showing that longing for a past that they once had, was spectacular. Everything to do with the directing was perfect, and I have no notes other than the fact that I hope to see more of this creativity in the trilogy. Something I will get out of the way quickly is that this movie does retcon 28 weeks later. At the end of the movie, it is revealed that the rage virus had somehow spread to France and many other countries, and 28 years later addresses this ending by having one of the characters explain that the virus was halted by forces like NATO and the UN, with the virus eventually being exterminated. However, when it was Great Britain's turn to be repopulated and contained, the world basically gave up on them due to the risk that came with it, leaving the people who did survive the outbreak to fend for themselves and live under constant surveillance, which is a terrifying premise in its own right. That Great Britain is screwed, and everyone outside of Great Britain doesn't even care. I personally love this change, compared to what 28 Weeks was proposing with the cliche, "Ooh, the entire world is infected" spiel. In a way, it makes the protagonist's situation even more dire and hopeless, due to the fact that no one is willing to help them, and that they are on their own. And partly what sells the hopelessness and isolation in the movie is the acting. There are some really great performances in this film, the biggest standout surprisingly being Alfie Williams, who plays the character of Spike. Despite the past movies having an issue with their child actors, like Hannah from 28 Days Later, who gave the worst performance out of the group.
Or die here. And anyway, it isn't true what Dad said. You need us just the same as we need you.
Girl, I'm sorry, but that acting is just atrocious. And Tammy and Andy from 28 Weeks Later, and no, I did not just look up their names because they were extremely forgettable characters, how dare you accuse me of that, who are main characters of the film and are even more painful to endure because of it. Fortunately, Alfie Williams breaks the mold and ironically outperforms everyone in this film. Originally, I was quite unsure about how I felt that one of the main characters in the movie would be a kid, due to how demanding an apocalypse film can be, since most of those stories tend to be quite miserable. But the kid does a fantastic job at hitting all the emotional beats. Hell, there is one part of the movie where Spike is at his lowest, and Alfie Williams truly gives it his all with a moving performance that made me well up a little. Of course, the other actors are great. Aaron Taylor Johnson plays the role of the father figure who is dealing with his own personal struggles, and Jodie's performance is something I will never soon forget, but Alfie's is just on another fucking level. The music is another component of this movie that I liked quite a bit, although in an interesting turn of events, this is the first movie within the 28 Days Later franchise that was not composed by John Murphy, and instead by young fathers, and while I did like this movie's soundtrack, it isn't nearly as memorable as the soundtrack in 28 Days Later. While it's understandable, it's hard not to compare the two, as they are both part of the same franchise. What did surprise me was its inclusion of the Rudyard Kipling poem, Boots. It's a poem that was heavily utilized in the trailer, but I found the way it was introduced in the film to be quite fitting with what the movie was trying to convey throughout its runtime. Although one thing that may be considered controversial about this movie is the way it was advertised. Unfortunately, this has been a running trend in the horror industry, that often movies will present their film in a certain way to get more people interested, but once you see it, the tone is a little different. The way the trailers advertise this movie shows it as some intense horror thriller, but when you watch it, it could not be more different. Sure, there are horror elements in the movie, but I wouldn't exactly call this movie a horror, and more of a character drama with some thrilling moments here and there. There were definitely moments where I was on the edge of my seat, but I was never particularly scared like I was watching 28 Days Later. While some people may see this as an issue, and understandably so if that was what they were expecting from the advertisements, I personally love the lack of horror in this movie. This movie makes a point from the get-go that humanity has adapted. This is no longer the same society that is terrified of the infected because of how they've had to adapt to survive. Sure, they'll run away from the infected, but they're a lot more competent than they were in 28 Days Later, which makes sense. In 28 Days Later, we are immediately thrusted into this new, unfamiliar environment, along with Jim, and we experience the horror alongside him. But it's been 28 years, everyone is familiar with the infected now, and so now they use the infected as a sport to prove one's manhood. The idea is quite brilliant, and the type of thing that people in the future would do if we lived in this type of environment. So no, while this movie isn't really a horror per se, I do think it benefits all the more from it. Speaking of which, I would say that this movie's main problem is some of the controversial decisions it makes in support of its narrative. There aren't many, but when you get to them, you will either love or hate the decisions made. The ending is the best example. While I won't spoil anything, I will say that the final 2 minutes of the movie have a really jarring tonal shift, and while I understand why they did it, I'm not so sure if I like it. Not to mention the way they execute it feels like an awkward sequel placement. I'm not saying that making things into a trilogy is a bad thing, but the ending of this movie just screams, "Please see our next movie, please!" I would have much preferred if this movie were just a singular 3-hour movie to cap off the trilogy, but if Danny Boyle thinks he can cook with this trilogy, then I believe him. Unfortunately, what sucks about that is that it's really hard to criticize this movie, as we've only been given a third of the story. So I can't really speak on a whole lot due to the whole mystery box style of writing that most trilogies use. I personally find it to be quite frustrating to experience as it is coming out, but it's not a huge issue or anything. However, there were some issues that I do have with the movie that are not related to the whole mystery box gimmick. One of them is that our protagonist happens to get saved by certain characters a bit too frequently for my taste. Some of them can be explained, but at times it does feel a little contrived, and it takes away from some of the stakes. Again, while most of it does tend to follow basic cause and effect, it still takes away from the tension when almost every time your character is in danger, they manage to get saved by some random third party. Another is that the inciting incident that kicks off the back half of the movie feels a tad contrived. Essentially, our protagonist finds out about a character who could help him with a problem that he has, and that it shouldn't be too much of a journey to get there, which I wouldn't mind if it was any other movie, but since this is an apocalypse movie, I feel like trying to find certain individuals in the middle of nowhere should prove to be an issue, and this one feels a bit too convenient for my liking. Again, not a huge problem, but just something that slightly annoys me. Other than that, I would say that the movie is essentially flawless. The issues I do have with the movie are quite minor, and didn't affect much of my experience whatsoever. I think when it comes to one of the movie's biggest strengths, it would have to be its storytelling and character writing, beautifully interweaving themes of toxic masculinity, death, love, and life. These are things that our main protagonist Spike learns about throughout the course of the film, and it's up to him to choose what path he will take. This movie knows when it wants to be a fun zombie thriller, and when to rip your soul out of your body and relentlessly stomp on it over and over again as it forces you to watch the horrors of what Spike experiences. I know the whole thing of, ooh, humans are the real monsters, is overdone and cliche, and while it is no different here, there is not really any other way you can tell a zombie story in an interesting way without that human conflict. However, I feel it is explored in a very fresh and new way with Alex Garland's writing. Before we go any further into the video, I will have to warn you that there will be spoilers from this point forward. If you haven't seen 28 Years Later yet, I highly recommend you do, and that you come back to this video once you've seen it. Okay, spoiler talk in 3, 2, 1. Continuing on about the discussion about the characterization and themes of the movie, I think one of the most interesting parts is Spike experiencing what life is like for the first time. His whole life he has been sheltered and learned so many different things throughout this movie, death being the main one, and from almost every person he interacts with, he learns something new about death. His father teaches him how to be brutal to your enemies. His mother shows him that death is slow and painful with her cancer. The soldier shows him his lack of empathy and survivalist mentality, where he will do whatever it takes to survive, even if that means threatening to kill children in exchange for his own safety. And Dr. Kelson, of course, leaving the most impact on him, that death is a part of life, and is something that shouldn't be feared, but embraced. That we only have one life, and that life is so precious and important. And we see Spike slowly having to come to his own conclusion about the meaning of life and death. Is it nihilistic? Embracing a survivalist mentality, perhaps? That's what the film explores with Spike. But it's not just death. Spike learns so much throughout the movie and puts it to practice. For example, as much as he despises his father, he still uses the skills and tactics that his father taught him to protect his mother. Although something important that this movie manages to remember is the fact that Spike is just some kid. Yes, he's arguably more skilled than most of the adults when the apocalypse started, but he still makes mistakes like any kid would. He tries staying up like his dad did on their first outing, and falls asleep, nearly getting himself killed. He attempts to keep his mother safe, and accidentally leads her into a building full of toxic fumes. What I'm trying to say is that I'm glad that the film recognizes that Spike is a kid and constantly fucks up despite his competence being previously established. It makes for not only a more likable protagonist, but a more human one too. That scene where Spike realizes that his mother is going to die was heartbreaking and my favorite scene within the whole movie. The way it was handled with the mother walking into the eternal dark, and the way it was shot was breathtaking. It's such a beautifully haunting scene, and you can tell whoever wrote this part of the script has definitely had a similar situation happen to them, because it felt a bit too real at certain points. It's handled with a lot of maturity, and the way Spike reacts when receiving the news about his mother can be described as nothing but incredible acting on Alfie Williams' part. This scene is not only the best part of the movie, but may just be the best scene in the entire franchise. Although it's hard to say, since the third act of 28 Days Later is pretty incredible as well. And despite my mixed feelings on the ending of the film, it does open up the question of the further exploration of toxic masculinity. This movie already explores it pretty well with Jamie's character, but I'm curious to see how it will be explored with Jimmy's group. If I were to predict the story structure within these next two films, I would say that the second movie will probably focus on Spike acting like an immature teen with Jimmy's group. Then the ending will have him realize that this path won't get him anywhere, and by the third movie, he will figure out who he wants to be. That seems to be where the trilogy is heading, and it's the best I've got since we haven't really got any further info on the second movie, other than its release date, so we'll just have to wait and see. The last thing I'll talk about in this video is the infected. Throughout the 28 years these infected have been around, they have evolved, but not in the way you think. They haven't exactly mutated into different types of infected like The Last of Us, they've just had a minor increase in intelligence. In the movie, there are 3 types of infected. The slow, barely functioning ones that are on the cusp of dying, the regular infected, who now hunt in packs and stick close together, and the alphas, a new type of infected that this movie introduces, and is basically if a gym bro on steroids got infected with the rage virus. While it's not entirely clear how these roid heads came to be, they are not to be trifled with. I'm hoping that these infected are expanded upon in the later movies, because these things were absolutely horrifying, and whenever one popped up on screen, I was on the edge of my seat. It's also implied that this strand of infected are slightly more intelligent than the regular infected, as it seems to get angrier at the sight of its own kind being killed. While I'm not entirely sure how the upcoming 2 movies will explore them, I'm looking forward to seeing them regardless, since the way this movie handled them was really well done. Despite all of its flaws and some weird Danny Boyle decision making that this film makes, it's still better than 90% of zombie media out there. This film actually feels like it had a story that needed to be told, rather than just reviving a dead franchise to milk it for everything it has. If you're on the fence about watching this movie, then I highly recommend that you do. I can't say that this movie will be for you, but I think this movie is something that everyone who likes the zombie medium should give a watch. So I'm going to go ahead and give 28 Years Later an 8 out of 10. This rating will probably change in future when the entire trilogy is out, but for the moment this is a fantastic opener to the trilogy, and I'm looking forward to see what Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have cooking for the second movie. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out my Discord and other socials for updates on videos, discussion on movies, TV shows, and games, and a lot more. That's all for now, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys.